Good day, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. This session will begin at the top of the hour.
Hello, everyone. We hope you had a great weekend. You may recognize my voice from last Wednesday's webinar. I'm Susan Mason from the National Science Foundation, and I just wanted to say a few words before we jump into today's program. Last week, Dan Agan mentioned over these next few weeks, and especially during the boot camp, you'll be turning your gaze more and more outward as you begin peering into the far broader, sometimes chaotic, and always intriguing innovation ecosystem. You'll start exploring the concepts, ideas, and disciplines by which novel ideas become the successful products and processes that materially benefit people and society. Customer discovery, the subject of today's webinar, is essential to the process that sees ideas become society-benefiting breakthroughs. Today you'll be learning all about customer discovery, and following this webinar you'll go out and start applying what you've learned. By the time you get to the boot camp, you'll have gotten your hands dirty and you'll be prepared to further build upon the foundation that your team has already built. It's my pleasure to introduce and turn things over to Grant Warner, who will be one of your instructors during your week in DC. Grant is a DC I-Corps instructor who is master at his craft, and he's also a ton of fun. Without further ado, welcome Grant, and I look forward to meeting you all in person in June on this very exciting journey. Grant, over to you.
Thank you, Susan. All right, you set the bar kind of high, so hopefully I'll get over it. But so I'm hoping to set the stage for the challenge by orienting you to customer discovery and the lean startup process. Again, as you've been encouraged to do, as questions pop up, please put them in the chat window, and we'll address them on the breaks. So let's begin with a question. So this one you don't have to answer. There'll be some that you will have to answer. And to get at the purpose, the way I'd like to start the conversation that we'll have is, what is the lean startup about? So it's something that you likely have heard about in the media, whether news or television shows, etc. We want to get to the heart of what the lean startup is about. So the lean startup process, as we teach it in I-Corps, is really about avoiding building something nobody cares about. Right? That's a really big statement. It's simple, but it's big. Right? The idea, as Susan was saying, is that we turn our gaze outward and really try to understand the ecosystem. And we begin by trying to understand our customers. Right? So we want to avoid building something nobody cares about and find something that they do care about. So the graph on the right, the figure on the right, might be hard to read. So I'll just put it on a slide by itself. And this was a survey of a few hundred startups, really looking at why those startups failed. And you'll see the number one reason that startups failed is because they built something that nobody wants. And that's a big motivating factor that informs all of what the lean startup process is really about. So do companies build product that nobody cares about? Right? It seems kind of obvious that you would not do this thing. But again, we can look in very recent history and find, yes, of course they do. So I hope no one from Segway is on the line, but Segway is one of those companies that I think did that. So Segway was very successful in raising money, raised over $100 million in 2001. Because they felt they had the answer, they used those funds on tech development. So they invested in the technology, not in understanding the people. They thought everybody would want a Segway, from mass market consumers to postal carriers. Right? Very different needs, they all would want it. At the time the Segway was under development, I was a graduate student, and I had some students that I was mentoring in high school, and they had a chance to go visit Dean Kamen, who invented the Segway, and they came back so excited. Oh, it's so cool, because there was so much hype built up around this. This was going to change the world. So Segway had estimated that they would sell 10,000 Segways per week. Because of that, they invested heavily in hiring logistics people. At the end of 2 years, they sold 6,000 total Segways. Not 6,000 per week, 6,000 total Segways. So they are a cautionary tale. Without being able to identify a particular customer and a particular need, they were unable to market this effectively. So when we overlay what Segway did with the cautionary tale told by the graph, I think they did all of these things. So they built something that nobody wanted, at least not on the scale that they anticipated people wanted. They hired poorly because they didn't really understand the need. So they invested heavily in logistics, and it turns out, given the low number they sold over 2 years, they didn't need that investment. Because they tried to sell to everyone, they never developed the initial niche market that would have been their platform to launch. And because they didn't have that focus, they couldn't market effectively. Right? So 1, 2, 3, 4 account for 79% of that pie graph. Right? 79% of startup failures. And I would argue they did all of those things. So if there's one thing that you walk away from this webinar, there's one message I want you to take. Don't be a Segway. Don't be a Segway. Segway believed in invention more than innovation. Right? They thought about the technology, the idea. Right? That's what invention focuses on. Innovation is the continuous process of adapting that idea to actual people. Right? Continuously adapting that idea to actual people. Inventors try to understand the technology. Innovators try to understand the people. We want you to focus on understanding the people. All right, so we'll get to our first poll. The first time we'll ask you to answer some questions. So how do you identify? Inventor or innovator or other? No wrong answers here. Okay, I see them. See them rolling in. No pressure, no wrong answer. All right, fantastic. Fantastic. So I see a high number of innovators in the room, which is what we hope, and then we hope to get everyone else into that pool also. So we'll talk a little bit more about this lean startup in the context of innovators moving forward. So as I said, the lean startup process is about avoiding building something nobody cares about. But at a higher level, it's really a framework and a tool set to support and develop innovators. So we're hoping to take those of you that self-identify as innovators, provide you with a new tool set. For those who might not view themselves as innovators, we're going to show you how low the bar is to be an innovator. That you are an innovator, you might not recognize it today. All right, so before I move on to the next section, if there are any questions, we want to encourage you to enter them into the chat window. So we'll give you a couple of seconds to start typing. If there are any questions, if there are none, then I will move on. Okay. I don't think there are any questions yet, so I'll move forward. But again, as your questions pop up, please feel free to type them into the chat window, and we have a number of breaks scheduled in the presentation, and we'll field those questions at that time. All right, so we'll get you involved by me asking you a question. So, how many people think the first step in launching a business is developing the business plan? It's a tough one. Let me see. Split vote so far. All right, so we have false, just slightly edging out true here. All right, interesting. All right, so looks like we do have a bunch of innovators in the room. So when I launched my first business, that's the way we looked at startups. The first step is you think of an idea. Second step is you develop your business plan. That was common practice. So the big questions that you tried to answer, is there an appropriate return on investment? So I need to establish that there was market size. I need to also establish that I can execute on a project plan. And if I did those things, I could hope to attract money and I could launch my venture. Right, so the key takeaway here is that it was common practice. Right now, we're no longer supporting that approach. So we know now that the first step is not to develop a business plan. Before we get to the business plan, there are other questions that we have to answer. So the primary question is, what value are you delivering to whom? Can I identify value propositions and the corresponding customer segments of what we call product market fit before I move past the first step? After that, I can begin to explore whether or not I could develop a business model for delivering that value to the customer. And to use that, we use something called the business model canvas. Then, after I've gone through and I've validated that there's a viable business model, then I might begin to ask the question about appropriate return on investment for the project, laying out the execution plan. Right, and that's where the business plan comes in. So we no longer advocate starting with the business plan. So what we have on the right-hand side is something called the value proposition canvas. Right, and as you might guess, it's a way to expose this value proposition in customer segments, begin to identify what we're calling product market fit. That's the first step. And it's not just that we want to introduce a new document. The idea is just to introduce a new process. Okay? So yes, we're replacing the business plan. Yes, we're advocating the use of these canvases, the value proposition canvas, the business model canvas. But more than that, we want people to look at the whole operation of launching a startup completely differently. Right? They're fundamental questions that we want you to answer. Who are your most important customers? What are their archetypes? What customer problems are you helping to solve? What needs are you satisfying? What job do they want you to get done for them? Right? All fundamental questions that we want you to probe. But we're releasing you from having to know the answer. So that was the fundamental challenge with a business plan. The business plan assumes that you already have the answer. So you're at the beginning and you're projecting all the way to the end. What we're saying to do is, yes, start at the beginning, expose all of your guesses. But then we have to get outside of the building, right? Outside of your group of friends, outside of your colleagues who might have developed the idea to you, on a search, or developed the idea with you, on a search for the answers. All right, we acknowledge we're guessing, we go out and we look for the answer. And it's an iterative process. So we acknowledge that, yes, I can be wrong. So my initial guess could be wrong. But that's okay, because as I go out and I find relevant answers, I can change my guesses and start the process all over again. That's the iteration. If I'm completely off, I can develop a whole new set of hypotheses that we call a pivot. That's the process that we're trying to enforce through what is now called customer discovery. It's a focus on evidence-based entrepreneurship. And we get out of the building to ask questions, to collect evidence that supports that there's a viable business here. So the customer discovery process, right, the mechanism for launching a lean startup, right, is this whole search process. We start off with a hypothesis. We test and interview, right? We assess and analyze, and then we adjust. Right, so we can make that plain. The hypothesis, again, as I've said, that's just a guess. The test is going out and asking people, right? Understanding what are the pains that motivate them now. Make sure you listen. Collect that data. Step back. Look at it again. Figure out what are they actually telling you. And if you need to adjust, guess again, right? And as you go through the process, the expectation is your canvas will change. So I've had a business, as I mentioned, where I've developed the business plan first, and we've been held accountable for that business plan. We've put down exactly what we intended to execute. When you have investors, they intend you to execute on that document, even though when we wrote it, we did not know. This is the process for getting to know, right, for collecting that evidence. So the big differentiator here is that the startup is in search mode. And in search mode, you don't know the end. You don't know what the end point is. Right? Well, if you know the end point, then you're just in execution mode. So startups are very different from businesses. Businesses execute. Startups search. And customer discovery is a fundamental part of that search process, a fundamental part of turning guesses into facts. So we do that by moving through the fits that I mentioned. The first stage is problem solution fit. Second stage, product market fit. Third stage, business model fit. And I'm going to talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. So starting again with problem solution fit. So the idea is to discover whom your customers are. And it's really motivated by a couple of fundamental questions. One, can you identify and validate a problem or need in the market that enough people care about? Right? So again, that's why we're going to ask you to go out of what we call get out of the building, right? To talk to people, to really understand what their problems and needs are. The second is, do you have a feasible solution for meeting this problem or need? Right? And if you can answer both of those questions, we're getting to that problem solution fit portion. Right, from there, we want to move to product market fit. And again, we have some motivating questions there, right? Can you build and deliver a product or service that satisfies the customer problem or need? Do the product service features deliver value, right? All right, does it alleviate the pain? Does it create enough gain to motivate the customer? Again, a couple of fundamental questions. Right, then lastly, we move on to this business model fit. And it's motivated by a different set of questions. Can you build and validate a repeatable and scalable business model? Right, so ultimately your goal as a startup is to become a real company. And answering these questions helps to set you on that course, right? It leads you to the business plan, but you don't start with the business plan. So of all those things, where we want you to focus for the boot camp is on problem solution fit. So just to make sure everybody was paying attention, we have another quick poll that we're going to ask you to complete. So in this poll, you're being asked to select two answers, right? Which two are questions for problem solution fit? remember, ideally you select 2. Okay, this is a good group. I see everybody is focused in on that problem and solution piece, not so much on. Oh, got it. Let's see, not so much on the pricing part, which is fantastic. So oftentimes in ICOR, when we deal with people just coming into the process, they realize that hey, I've already got the solution. What I need to do is figure out how I can sell it to someone, and we try to back them off the precipice. No, it's not about selling. Right? What it's about is understanding the problem and need, figuring out whether or not what you think is a solution is a solution to them. I see there's some challenges with selecting 2 in this window. That's fine. I think that we've exposed the 2 big questions for problem solution fit. Thank you for participating in that. All right, so those are the 2 answers. Can you identify and validate a problem or need in the market that enough people care about? Again, it's what we want you to focus on. 2, do you have a feasible solution for meeting this problem or need? All right, so are there any questions? So I see that we have one question in here from Dan. All right, can you use one value proposition with everyone? That's a great question. So the part of the motivation for using the value proposition canvas, and you can see one side is a circle, one side is a square, is because finding that product market fit is not easy, right? We don't want to fit the circle in the square, and we want to make sure that we can identify the unique value propositions for each type of customer. So one value proposition oftentimes does not work with everyone. And that's the nuance in going out and interviewing and really understanding what the unique value proposition is that applies to that customer segment. Great question. Looks like we might have another question coming in. Okay. All right. So we'll move forward and we'll dive a little bit deeper into this idea of customer discovery. All right. So how many people have previously used the scientific method? Now we want to establish just how easy innovation can be. All right, so the question looks like it's all, so you should just answer the question of have you previously used the scientific method? The question in the box shows, is my customer discovery job done? Really, I'm just asking, have you used the scientific method? Sorry about that. All right, good. So it seems like most people are already familiar with the scientific method, which is great. And again, the reason that I'm highlighting that is because customer discovery leans very heavily on the scientific method. So all of the elements of the scientific method that you're already familiar with will help to make you a great innovator. All right, so in the scientific method, we walk through the process, we observe phenomena, we formulate a hypothesis, we test that hypothesis with experiments, look at the results of those experiments to potentially modify hypotheses, and then go through the cycle again of testing. And then once we've validated our hypothesis, right, we go on to establish theory, right? But it's also perfectly legitimate that you invalidate your hypothesis, right, and move on to something else. So this idea of being in this loop of formulating, testing, modifying, that's what's at the core of the scientific method. And we're also going to leverage that for customer discovery. Right, so as I mentioned, said, well, we're going to start here, right? The goal is to start on the value proposition canvas and really try to identify what's the customer jobs we think we can help, where are the pains and gains, and can I develop some of these pain relievers to their pains, right? That's some of the fundamental things that we'll try to explore. And we could map that very easily to the scientific method, right? So we're asking you to get out the building, right? The idea is to help you observe the phenomena, right? So right now you have an idea in your head that provides some foundation for your guesses about this, right? So who you think the customer might be, right? What jobs are you helping them to get done? What emotional jobs do they need to get done? Do they need to feel good? Social jobs, are they trying to look good? Do they need status? Right, what basic needs are you helping your customers satisfy? Right, communication, and you could think of innovations that help with all of those things. Right, the iPhone might help you communicate, but it also helps you feel good. Right, it communicates. It also communicates something about your social status. Right, that's why design was so important to it. Right. And we think about the jobs in very practical ways to try to expose the pains and the gains, right? So, what are the undesired costs? What are the risks that they have currently that you might be able to help with? What are they trying to do, right? So what utility or social gains can you provide, right? These are all the foundation for your initial guesses, right? And then you use those questions to formulate your hypotheses. And then we're going to ask you to make a guess and put it directly on the canvas, right? So these green boxes are supposed to represent sticky notes that you might put on there, right, for your hypotheses about what might be gain creators, right? How does your innovation create customer gains? Here's some of your hypotheses, your initial guesses right on the canvas. All right, pain relievers. How does your innovation relieve customer pain, right? Your guesses could go directly on the canvas. And the reason why I'm saying sticky notes, as you remember, right, the idea is that we want to go out, test them, and if they're wrong, change them, right? And how do we test, right? What experiments do we run in customer discovery? We get out of the building and we talk to customers, right? We take our hypotheses, we explore them directly with the customer. Again, this is the mantra for ICOR, it's the mantra for customer discovery, it's the mantra for lean startup. Get out of the building. Right, so you test the problem, and the key is we want to make sure we're identifying customer problems and needs, right? Not trying to sell, trying to understand. Right, and you see in the box here to say, oh, what's your biggest headache? Great way to start a conversation to really begin to understand someone's problem. Right? Focus on the pains, the gains in their jobs. So if you're doing this right, you're likely to find that you have made some of your guesses incorrectly. So you have to be open to modifying, restating your hypotheses, making new guesses based on the evidence that you've collected talking to customers. And then we go back. We call that, as I mentioned, the iterate or pivot, and then we go back through the cycle again, right? So I started off with 4 guesses in green. I realized some of this is wrong. I crossed those out. Then I put up some new ones, right, in blue, right, my new guesses. So again, I think part of it is figuring out what your product looks like, and that's the box I have up here, right? So what are the things that I can do for my customer? You'll find out, well, things need to change. It's not quite what I thought. But you might find out when you go and do your interviews that you're wrong about who the customer is. And that's equally as valid to go out and change. We see that all of the time. Someone comes in and says, well, I think my customer is going to be the engineer or the scientist, and find out, well, really what matters is the head of business development. That's the key person, right? So again, you could either make changes to what you think the pain relievers are, gain creators are, or you can make changes to who your customer is. All equally valid ways to iterate. All right, so again, we go back, we reformulate, we restate our guesses. So now I have a new combined canvas just with the mixture of the blue and the green. I've eliminated the ones I think were wrong. And then we go out again, right? We repeat all of this as needed. And that's how we establish this problem solution fit, right? We start off with a guess, we go talk to people, we reflect on what they told us, reformulate our guess, go out and talk again. And once we get enough validation, we've established problem solution fit, right? And that's the goal that we've established for you for this boot camp. So that's going to be our focus. So we have some homework for you. So the homework is to develop a canvas. So as Ellen has just pointed out in the chat box, that's the download that's available right now on the webinar. So if you download that file, you'll get the value proposition canvas, and we want you to take a best guess at all elements, right? These are going to be your fundamental hypotheses and guesses. Then we're going to ask you to conduct 5 interviews to begin to explore problem solution fit, right? And that really just means interviewing your customer, right? Not interviewing whomever, interviewing who you think your customer is. We want to make sure those are relevant interviews. All right, so that's relatively straightforward, but I assume there might be some questions around that. So again, if you have questions around the homework, please enter it into the chat box.
Hi, Grant. This is Ellen. We do have one question in the chat box. Which is the more powerful motivator, pain relief or gain acquisition?
That's a great question. And again, it varies by your innovation and your customer. So when we look at luxury goods, for example, for the most part, luxury goods all sell for gain, right? So that's the biggest motivator in that purchase. But we can think about many other things that we have that all are around pain, right? Things that were very difficult to do, and here comes a way to alleviate all of that pain. So, that's part of the challenge of the customer discovery process, is that we want you to go out and tell us which one is going to be more powerful for your specific customer, and why is that? And we'll delve into that a little bit in the next section.
And Grant, we have a request to go back to the previous slide.
No, we don't want to show the homework again. We wanted you to memorize it quickly.
Homework again, yeah.
I'm just kidding. All right, so again, please download the canvas, take a best guess at all of the elements, and then begin to think about who you would need to interview in order to validate or invalidate some of the hypotheses you put down there.
Hey, Grant, this is Susan. Why don't you tell them how this is all going to fit into the boot camp next week, so maybe it makes a little more sense to them?
Sure. So during the boot camp, we're going to ask you to report out about the results of your interviews. So that'll be part of what we discuss. But then we're going to deep dive a little bit into this value proposition development and also what customer segments look like. So it'll be an opportunity to reflect not only on the interviews, but on the interviewees, right? Who you interviewed and what role they might play in the process as you potentially build out a business. So this is the foundation for all of that work. So for us to have a strong boot camp, we need you just to go out and talk to people. And there's no wrong answers here. Whatever you do, you will collect some meaningful information. It's not all about validating your business. It's all about understanding. All right. So seeing no more questions, maybe I'll move forward again. All right, so we're asking you to go out and do these 5 interviews. So we want to give you some key pointers to help you make that happen. So here are some of the things that we share with teams as they come into I-Corps. Right? So in I-Corps, they have 7 weeks. We ask them to do 100 interviews. That's a pretty heavy lift. But the teams manage to do it. All the time we have people come in and say, oh, this is so daunting. No, there's no way I'll get to it. The interviews are a headache. I don't think people will accept my request to interview. And each time they get to 100 and realize how much they've learned from that. And the best practices we've tried to capture in this slide. So one is to get the ball rolling, use your network for warm introductions. So you guys are lucky to have an industry partner available. So you would want to start. There. The other piece is oftentimes people will come in and say, well, I need to talk to a CEO. I need to talk to the manager. So no, work your way up. Talk to maybe people very low on the totem pole and see if they can make introductions for you. Outside of the warm introductions, and maybe even including those, make sure you research your target, right? So it helps not only inform the questions that you'll ask, but it will put you and the person you're talking to at additional ease, right? It's like, oh, okay, they know something about me. There's a reason why they contacted me. So the number one thing that we tell all of the participants in I-Corps is to make sure you use the fact that you're a student. So the thing that people fear most, particularly around cold calls, is that I'm receiving a call for someone to sell me something that I'm not interested in. But if you introduce yourself as a student, or you introduce yourself as someone participating in an NSF-funded project, National Science Foundation-funded project, the barrier drops substantially. So we were having a session last week, one of the I-Corps kickoff sessions, and one of the mentors is a venture capitalist, and he said how difficult it is for him to do cold calling because people tend to close up when he calls. And he's marveled at how much more easily the student on his team is able to get calls by using this mechanism because people open up and are willing to talk to you because they understand that you're not selling. So please do that. Also make sure to advise them that you're looking for their insights and their expertise. Again, as a way to diffuse the whole sales call aspect of this. And we often recommend people prepare a script. So particularly for cold calls, also when thinking about, okay, well, what am I testing? What questions do I need to ask? It makes sense to think about this, lay it all out beforehand, but then don't go in and use it, right? So don't read from your script, right? Be comfortable with your script so that it allows you to be flexible and pursue the conversation as it develops naturally. So again, as we think about the cold call script, what are the great elements that might go into it? Right, so one is who you are, right? You want to explain that. What are you looking for? Again, you want to put the person at ease immediately. Why are you contacting that person? And so how do I personalize this and make a connection with you? And how much time do you need? Right? So I don't feel like I'm going to get trapped into an hour. So I've put together a sample cold call script that I think captures all of those elements. Right, so I'd say, hello, my name is Grant Warner. I'm working on a National Science Foundation project exploring product shipment. Right, so right off the bat, it tells you the who. So I'm not a student, so I couldn't use that line, but if you are, please use that line. Right, so you might say, well, I'm a researcher working on a National Science Foundation project. Right, so again, sets the context for the who. Right, what do I want? I'm reaching out to experts in this area to gain their insight into factors that drive, that should not have said student engagement, that's fine, that drive product shipment decisions. Right? So again, we've level set the what. Why am I reaching out to this person? I've been advised that you have deep expertise in this topic, right? And then earlier I said I'm reaching out to experts. So I've set the stage that I'm talking to you because I value your personal opinion. Right? I've tried to flatter you by calling you an expert, things that will open you up to a conversation. Now, how much time do I need? And I hope that I could speak with you for 5 to 10 minutes. So within 3 sentences, we have all of the great elements of an initial, introduction, whether I'm walking up to someone on the street or I'm calling them or I'm sending an email. However I make that introductory connection, I have all of the key elements. Right. So that's getting the interview. And when you conduct the interview, there are also some things that we want to make sure that you focus on. Right? So you want to continuously be focused on insight and help. Right? So you're not selling anything. You're not there to talk about your product. You're there for their insight and help. You want to start wide. Right? So the best interviews happen when they're telling a story about the pain and not when they're talking about your specific innovation. Right? So we want to start wide, and then if they mention, kind of what are your big headaches, and then if they mention, a headache that aligns with one of your value propositions, then you begin to deep dive a little. Right? But we want to start out wide and then narrow it. You want to make sure you're asking open-ended questions, not just yes, no questions. And then you want to make sure you understand the underlying motivations for why they answered the question a particular way. Right? So you want to make sure you ask why. Why do we say ask why repeatedly is necessary? So these are our best practices for conducting the interview. All right, and just to help kind of feed you with some questions that we think are related to pains and gains. Right, so when we think about key customer pain questions, here are a few of them. What do they find too costly today? Why do current solutions not work? Right, things that might expose problems with their current process. What difficulties do they face? What keeps them awake at night? What are the barriers to adoption? What risks do they fear? Again, open-ended questions that will start to generate conversation that you can then deep dive around specific topics. Right, likewise, we can look at key customer gain questions. Right? What will make them happy? What level of quality is expected? What do they like about current solutions? What will make their life easier? Right? So it's a nuance between pains and gains, but in both cases, we're asking open-ended questions that we hope will generate a lot of discussion. All right, so let's kind of walk through an example. So again, I'm in my shipping persona, right? So I'm trying to understand the problems that are there around product shipment. So I'm interviewing someone and I say, what difficulties do you experience with shipped products? Right? And they answer, well, our customers are unhappy because shipped products don't meet their specifications. All right, so did I do my job for customer discovery? So I know that there was some voting had started on that. There we go. So now it's open back up again. All right, so I've gone in with what I think is an open-ended question. I've asked that question. Did I do a good job at customer discovery here? All right, so the no's are pouring in, telling me that I'm not so good at this thing. All right, so that's great. So I thought that this would be a little bit of a trick question. Turns out not. So it is a good question, but the job is not done yet. because what we want to enforce is that you go through and continue to ask why. So they gave you an answer. So your why is not just why. Your why is very specific. So why are customers being shipped bad products? Then they answer, because manufacturing built the products to a different specification than the customer and the salesperson agreed to. Right? Then you can ask a follow-up why. So why did manufacturing build to a different specification than sales? I don't understand. Why did that happen? Then they said, well, because sales calls directly to manufacturing to expedite the work. An error happened in communication. Okay, so why did sales call ahead, right, without doing something else? Is there no other process here? Well, yeah, the current form requires a sales manager's signature that slows down the manufacturing process, so they're doing it to get around that process. But why does the sales manager need to sign the form? Right? Because he needs to report sales directly to management. Right, so we go through what we call the 5 whys. Here there was only 4. But we call this process the 5 whys, really driving down, trying to understand what is the deep motivating factor for the behavior that I observed. And if I had stopped at the initial point where I asked you, had I done a good job of customer discovery, right? So I followed my own advice. I asked an open-ended question, plucked one directly from the list for customer pains and gains. But if I had stopped there, I would have thought that what we needed was a new tool between sales and manufacturing. Right? But by asking the 5 whys, we understand that, well, the solution really lies in updating the sales manager. Right? If I could find a better process for updating the sales manager, we'll avoid all of this problem. And so those are the ways we want you to approach customer discovery. Start off with an open-ended question. When you find something that's interesting, begin to drill down with the 5 whys, right? And try to make your why questions as specific as possible, and then stop when you have what you think is the fundamental answer. All right, so now we want to move to closing the interview, right? So inside the interview, we want to make sure we do the 5 whys. Closing the interview, you want to ask, what else should I have asked about? So again, we're going to start very broad. They may say something initially that gets you chasing after the 5 whys. So you may not even address something that they think is important. So you want to make sure you expose that by asking, what else should I have asked about? Who else should I talk to? Again, part of the challenge in getting the interviews is getting that first interview. Because that first interview hopefully can begin to set up additional interviews for you through referrals. But you have to ask for them. And this is one way to ask for them. As we've mentioned, the discovery process is about going out, developing a hypothesis, talking to people to test that hypothesis, stepping back and reflecting on those answers. Sometimes as you reflect, you'll find that you didn't ask every question that is important to you. So you want to leave that door open by asking, can I follow up with you later? And then you want to be courteous and thank them for their time and their insight. Okay, so those are our do's. So here are the big don'ts. So don't sell, pitch, sell, right? So the idea is not to go out and sell anything. The idea is not to go out and talk about your technology. The idea is not to ask them what they want. Right? You're going to develop a solution. You might already have a solution in mind. Your goal right now is to figure out, is there a real problem there? Right? Then you'll figure out what are ways for solving that problem that, you have an idea in your head. You want to test out whether or not that idea makes any sense. Right? When you push it on the customer, you begin to make them uncomfortable. Right? Then you'll start talking about features, and then you'll be in sales mode. So let's not do that. All right. So we're going to test your acumen for this stuff with a series of good question, bad question responses. So this will require you just to reflect. So you won't have to answer. All right. So the question is, good question or bad question? What is the biggest issue you face in dealing with process/activity Y? So that's a good question, right? It's open-ended. It's in the customer's shoes. It allows them to get talking about something that bothers them, and it allows you to evaluate whether or not you fit into any of their top priorities. So, good question. Would you buy a product which did X? That's a bad question. Right? And the reason it's bad is because it's yes or no. If I'm trying to get insights from people, I want to avoid yes-no questions, and what I'd like to get are open-ended questions. What are the implications of not solving the problem? That's a great question. So, again, we talk about this idea of a value proposition. What better way to get at the value of something than having the customer tell you directly, right? So all of the implications that they list begin to build the argument of value for you. And so that's a great question. How are you dealing with this today? Another great question. So again, in I-Core, when people tell me that, hey, we think we have a validated problem, I'll ask them to provide evidence. One of the key pieces of evidence is finding out whether or not they're dealing with it today. If this is a problem that's urgent, they are working on a solution, no matter what that solution could be. It could be jerry-rigged. It doesn't have to be something they're buying. It could be something that they're putting together. It could be some weird process they've adopted. You have to find out how they're dealing with it today. Or potentially it's a problem that really doesn't matter. What solutions have you tried? Again, good question. Gets them talking about what they're doing to address the problem. And if it's nothing, unless there's a really good reason for them not having pursued a solution, it will be a problem if they do not have a solution. What would your dream product do? All right. So some people argue that this is a good question because it's open-ended and it gets people talking. I think it's a bad question because, again, it puts the onus on the customer to solve the problem, but it also begins to get them walking down a feature conversation, and that moves away from an open-ended discussion on problems, etc. There's an opportunity to explore your features, your specific features, later on in the process. Here again, we're dealing with this idea of problem solution. Would you pay X for a solution that did Y? Pretty sure you all get the gist that that's a bad question, right? So that's a yes/no question. And again, we're starting to get really feature specific. Where does the money come from to deal with this issue? Right, another good question. It begins to help you to understand who else might be important. In your mind, you think, as I've mentioned before, it's the engineer or the scientist that's important, only to find out from your interview that they actually don't do the purchasing. In order for it to be purchased, it has to be approved by a business manager. Now you know there's another person you need to talk to. All right, what do you think about this solution? No. Bad question. Bad question. All right, so I want to leave you with a couple of points here. All right. So again, we want you to focus on the customer discovery, and that means that you're going to go out, do these 5 interviews, trying to help with the understanding of who is the customer and what is the problem. Again, you all are innovators. Most of you have come into the webinar as innovators, right? So hopefully you'll leave with some new tools to help you do innovation, and we'll refine those at the boot camp. But we're going to start here, right, just on the discovery portion. Right, so this part we're going to call problem solution fit, right, when you can answer those questions. Right, then the other piece we'll leave with is the homework, right? So again, we've had it up here before. I want you to download the canvas, take a best guess at all of the elements for the canvas. These are going to be your fundamental guesses and hypotheses. Go out and conduct 5 interviews, right, and explore this idea of problem solution fit. And all that means is going out and interviewing people, right? Talking to people. All right, so with that, again, we have an opportunity for you to ask questions. Please, if there was anything throughout the webinar that you had a question about, now was the time to ask it.
Grant, we have a question. How do you recommend interpreting the feedback when the responses seem evenly split or even contradictory?
That's another great question. So, you know, we see all the time, people will go out and they'll have a hypothesis on who their customer is, and they'll go and they'll interview people, and then they'll get results that are very different from seemingly the same customer. So oftentimes we ask, well, are they actually the same customer, right? So perhaps there are similar customers, but there might be a difference. So I have a company that sells a communication platform to higher ed. And when we went out and we spoke to faculty members, we found that some people were very enthusiastic about our solution. Others were not. And they were all faculty members, but when we dug deeper into it, we saw that the type of school that they were at was informing their response. And from that, we figured out, well, our initial customer segment was the for-profit colleges and universities. So we ask you just to be really precise when you go out and you're asking questions on the demographic information that you're collecting, making sure you're diligent about asking open-ended questions and following up with the 5 whys. And then we'll figure out as we go through the boot camp how we might interpret your individual responses.
And I have a question just as a point of clarification. You've mentioned I-Core a few times throughout the webinar. Would you mind just briefly explaining what I-Core is and why we've adapted this particular model for the Innovation Bootcamp?
Sure. That's great. Yeah, I'm sorry. I always get on people who begin to use jargon without explaining it. I fell into my own trap. So I-Core is NSF's Innovation Core program. So what I-Core does is it takes faculty and generally graduate students, almost predominantly graduate students, from the research universities and walks them through this customer discovery lean startup process so they can begin exploring the commercialization of their research. So NSF puts quite a bit of money into the science community and would like to see a return on that investment, not in the sense of the researchers paying NSF back, but putting that research to work for the public good. And part of that public good is creating jobs and economic opportunity. So through the I-Core I-Core process, customer discovery, problem solution fit, we've been able to, I think we're on 900 plus teams that have gone through that process. And I think there are 400, 500 startups, something like that. So we think it's a good model for exploring whether or not there's a viable business there. And even where there's not, what we found is that the faculty and graduate students go back to their home institutions with new skills that are beneficial to their careers as they move forward. So we think it's not just about launching startups. It's about really developing a 21st century skills toolkit that you can use whether you decide to continue at the university, go on to work in industry, or eventually find something that you use to launch your own business.
Thank you. If folks have any additional questions, please feel free to enter them into chat, or you can contact us by email following. Susan, did you have any further questions or clarifications you wanted to make?
Sorry, Ellen, I had to unmute my microphone. Grant, how do you interpret the feedback when it comes in from different people if it doesn't seem to be going your way, or the responses are contradictory, or what do you do with that information? How do you process it?
Yeah, I want to pick up on the negative part because I really didn't talk about that. So again, the big idea, well, people come in with the big idea that, hey, I have to launch a startup. So a startup is a painful process. And so, when it goes well, people see the success stories, but oftentimes, people have to really struggle to even get there. And that part's not so well advertised. So there's a great benefit to going out very early and finding out that this idea does not fly. So we ask people to keep an open mind when you get evidence that, as we call it in ICOR, your baby is ugly. So people don't necessarily like to hear that, but it could save you a lot of time. And you could pivot and move to something else. You can figure out whether or not, kind of the thing that you're working on can apply to a different customer segment, or you need to go work on something totally different. And each of those is a good outcome. It doesn't have to be a startup for it to be a great outcome. So keep an open mind. Think about whether or not there are really strong, legitimate points in there that you can then use to change your idea slightly, or is it time just to close up shop and work on something else and make a better use of your time? To me, again, all of those are great outcomes.
Grant, you explained to them what the ICOR program was. Can you tell them that how long the program is?
Yeah, so the ICOR program runs for 7 weeks, 6 to 7 weeks. Again, the goal is for people to get to 100 interviews, and then even after 100 interviews, sometimes they come out without product market fit. So the idea of customer discovery is not a process that starts and stops. It's a process that you would do continuously if you had a company or a startup. But again, the goal of it is not just for people to launch startups. In some cases, again, the goal is just to give them a new skill set, and we see that happening. They take it back, faculty members take it back to campus, use it to inform their research directions. They've also taken elements of it into the classroom, use it in classes like senior project, undergraduate research. So we think there's wide applicability for this.
Does anybody have any other questions for Grant? We're really kind of here to serve you. Does this make everybody frightened? I'd love to hear from you.
Well, there's nothing to be frightened about. But yeah, I'd love to hear whether or not people are parts of it.
Well, I think you should think about this as an exciting challenge or opportunity.
Just to speak to this, the part about FAIR and customer discovery. So at the in each I-Core session, we give away an award at the end of it, at the end of the, the 6 or 7 week session. We give an award, kind of Spirit of I-Core award. And so more often than not, that award is given to the entrepreneurial lead, the student who comes in with the faculty member, who on the first day, it's like, oh, this process is not really for me. They get up and they really have a hard time addressing the room. They're hesitant to go out and talk to people. Then at the closing session in a month and a half later, this person commands the stage. They're up there talking about all of the interviews they were able to get, the pivotal interview that opened up the floodgates for them. So again, there's nothing to be afraid of in the process. Even if you don't consider yourself a people person, the process connects you with people naturally. You'll see changes if you allow yourself to go through it.
Grant, most of these teams have 3 to 5 members on them. Should they all do customer interviews, or should just one of the team members do it?
That's another great question. So again, I guess I should have put that up there. So it reminds me of a gap in my slides. So what we recommend is that whenever you go out to do an interview, at least 2 members of the team should go out. Maybe not 5, because you might intimidate the person you're interviewing, but at least 2. So someone to really have a discussion with the interviewee and someone else to record the notes. And that role can swap back and forth between the 2 who go, because I think there's value in everyone going out and doing interviews. I really do. But yeah, in terms of best practice, you probably don't want 5 people going independently. Split up into some kind of teams and then go that way.
And Grant, you want them to bring the feedback to the boot camp with them, don't you?
Yes, indeed. Yes, come prepared to show us how your Canvas may or may not have changed based on the feedback. Become prepared to talk about your biggest takeaways from the feedback, what you found out that you might not have known, what things changed based upon your interviews, but you come prepared to report out about that. And again, that's going to form the basis for our sessions where we discuss customer discovery.
Okay, well, I don't have any more questions. If the rest of the teams don't have any more questions, Ellen, anybody else on the line have something they'd like to add?
No, I think we can just thank you and thank Grant for the presentation. We actually have a quick survey that follows this webinar, just in terms of its effectiveness, and if you understood it, we'd appreciate your feedback on that. So we can help improve it for future offerings. And just as a reminder, this webinar was recorded. The slides and the recording will be available. And if you have any questions following this webinar, please feel free to email Ken. We can funnel your question to Grant if he's the appropriate person to answer it. But we're happy to address any questions you have as they surface following this webinar. And again, we look forward to seeing you all in June. This is a really exciting event, and we're excited to have you be a part of it. Thank you.
And thank you very much for taking time this afternoon to be on this webinar.
Yes, thank you all. Look forward to seeing you at the boot camp.
This will conclude our webinar for today. We'll leave it open for a few extra moments in case you'd like to download the link for this survey. If you're having any difficulty, please let us know in the chat window, and I'll be happy to put it the actual link there for anybody who may need it. Thank you